Scotty's Castle is a famous historic mansion in Death Valley National Park in Eastern California. It's known for its unusual history, striking architecture, and ties to one of the West's most colorful characters. This colorful character was Walter Edward Scott, known as Death Valley Scotty. Born in 1872 in Kentucky, died in 1954 in California. He's known for tall tales of a secret gold mine, pulling off publicity stunts like record-breaking train rides, telling of his wild desert adventures that helped make Death Valley famous. One of the tall tales Scotty told was that he had a rich, secret gold mine in Death Valley. He said it made him very rich and that the location was a big secret. As a result of this story, people were curious and wanted to know more. They even wanted to invest in the mine. Albert M. Johnson, a well-respected and religious insurance magnate from Chicago, was very interested and invested. Albert made a trip to Death Valley to check on his investment claims. Instead of gold, he found a spectacular desert, improved health, and peace. Those reasons, along with his friendship with Scotty, made Albert and his wife Bessie decide to build a winter retreat in Death Valley. During the construction of the retreat, Scotty entertained them with countless stories about his mine and the surrounding area. Although he never saw Scotty's mine and was most certainly being swindled, Mr. Johnson did not seem to mind. He had found riches in the desert far greater than those that glitter. Besides, he had taken a liking to the eccentric desert rat. The two men began a lifelong friendship that would change the history of Death Valley forever. Albert stayed in Death Valley to oversee the construction of a large two-story Spanish-style villa castle as a winter retreat. The villa blended mission and Spanish influences with towers and courtyards. Work on the villa continued from 1922 to 1931. Some of the materials used in the building were gotten locally. These materials included stone that was quarried from the nearby Grapevine Mountains and sand and gravel that came from nearby washes. Other materials that could not be sourced locally, such as cement, steel, lumber, tile, plumbing fixtures, electrical equipment, machinery, furniture, and decor, were hauled in from railroads and towns outside the valley. Many of the materials were put on a train departing from Los Angeles. The train traveled to the T&T, or Tidewater and Tonopah line. Here it continued to Bonnie Claire. Once in Bonnie Claire, trucks and wagons were used to haul the loads over the rough desert roads of Grapevine Canyon to Death Valley, where the castle was being constructed. Teams of horses or mules were used where engines struggled, especially on grades. Finally, on-site crews unloaded and staged the materials for construction. All this was difficult in extreme heat when flash floods washed out roads. There were steep, narrow canyon roads and limited fuel, water, and repair facilities along the way. Every delivery was a small expedition. In short, the castle exists because of determination, money, and an enormous amount of hauling through one of the harshest landscapes in North America. With building materials on site, the dream started to take shape. Scotty's castle was built from the inside out, starting with water and power. A spring-fed water system was built, and a Pelton wheel was installed to generate electricity. As Scotty's castle grew, its electrical needs quickly outpaced the original plan. The demand for electricity exploded, and the Pelton water wheel could not be scaled up to handle it. A diesel generator, however, could provide the steady, powerful electricity needed to run an increasingly complex and modern desert estate. The batteries were added when Scotty's castle switched to diesel power in the mid-1920s, and they were just as important as the engines themselves. Their job was to store electricity and keep it stable. Diesel generators of that era could not quickly adjust to sudden changes in demand, such as when lights were turned on, pumps started, or an elevator was used. Without batteries, this would have caused lights to flicker, motors to stall, and generators to strain. To prevent this, the Johnsons installed a large battery bank that acted as a buffer. The diesel engines ran at a steady speed to charge the batteries, and the batteries then delivered smooth, reliable power wherever and whenever the castle needed it. Ceramic-lined exhaust flues and heavy chimneys were built to safely carry heat and fumes from the engines. That tall, striped column is the remains of Scotty's castle's smokestack, the exhaust stack for the diesel power plant. It was one of the most important structures at the ranch, carrying hot exhaust and fumes high into the air so the engines could safely power the entire estate. This narrow corridor is part of Scotty's castle's hidden service system that ran behind the public rooms. It allowed workers to access pipes, wiring, and machinery without being seen by guests. These tunnels kept the castle's modern systems running while preserving the illusion of an old-world desert estate. Together, these innovations made Scotty's castle one of the most modern buildings in the desert. The basement was finished first, with heating, power, and water systems put in place. Once these were installed, the walls rose above it, and the building began to take shape as a grand home. Tiles were shipped to Death Valley in crates from California and Mexico. They were stored on site, often in the basement, and installed one by one as rooms were completed. This long concrete corridor was used to store and move construction materials and heavy equipment while the castle was being built, and later served as a utility passage for workers. Along the sides are stacks of tiles and bricks waiting to be installed, as well as other materials. These decorative ceramic tiles were hand-painted and glazed in bold earth tones, deep blues, greens, yellows, and reds, and formed repeating patterns inspired by Spanish and Moorish design. Each tile was fired and set by hand, making every piece slightly unique. They were used throughout the castle, on floors, stairways, bathrooms, in the kitchen, on walls, on fountains, and in the courtyards. The Johnsons used tile to transform a harsh desert building into something elegant, cool, and timeless, an old-world European estate rather than a rough frontier lodge. Beyond their beauty, they helped keep spaces cool, resisted heat, and were easy to clean. More than decoration, the tiles were part of the Johnsons' plan to make Scotty's castle feel like a refined, old-world European estate rather than a rough desert outpost. Bessie Lambert had met Albert M. Johnson through Chicago high society in the early 1900s. Well-educated and musically trained, Bessie moved in cultural circles of concerts and lectures. Sharing a love of travel, music, and European culture, they married in 1910 and formed a partnership in which Albert provided the means and engineering vision, while Bessie shaped the cultural and aesthetic direction that later defined Scotty's castle. The castle was her stage. She wanted guests to feel transported, cultured, and lifted above the desert. This is a carved wooden ceiling in the castle. The beams and painted designs gave it a Spanish, Moorish, old world look. One of the instruments in the home was a harmonium. This is a small keyboard instrument that uses pumped air and metal reeds to create a soft, warm sound, often used for quieter music and accompaniment. A player piano plays by itself using a paper music roll. At Scotty's castle, it provided music anytime, even when no one was there to play, adding to the feeling of constant elegance and entertainment in the desert retreat. They also had a grand piano. It was a large keyboard instrument used for live performances, sing-alongs, and accompaniment, providing rich sound in the music room. The pipe organ is in the music room along with the grand piano. It is a 1920s Welte Mignon reproducing organ with over 1,100 hidden pipes, plus chimes and percussion. Played live or by paper rolls, it turned the castle into a private concert hall in Death Valley. Bessie Johnson quietly shaped the musical life of Scotty's castle, helping turn a remote desert ranch into a cultural retreat. Well-traveled and accustomed to European traditions, she valued music not as entertainment for crowds, but as a symbol of refinement, comfort, and everyday life. Scotty loved posing at the organ as part of his show, though he wasn't trained to play it. The organ was installed mainly for Bessie Johnson, the household's true musician. Scotty and Albert entertained wealthy guests, politicians, and celebrities with a blend of frontier adventure and high society. Scotty supplied the stories and showmanship, while Albert quietly managed the details, leaving visitors with an unforgettable memory of Death Valley. Scotty's room at the castle was small, simple, and tucked away. especially compared to the grand public rooms. He slept in a modest guest room on the first floor with just a basic bed, a small desk or dresser, and simple furnishings. Scotty was very attached to his dog Wendy, who was a familiar presence around the castle grounds. The image of Buffalo Bill Cody on the wall fits Scotty perfectly. Like Buffalo Bill, Scotty turned the West into legend and performance. The picture showed his public showman side, while a small devotional image of Christ reflected Scotty's Catholic faith and stood in quiet contrast to the showman image he presented elsewhere in the castle. From the 1910s to the 1930s, the Johnsons traveled widely overseas, while Scotty joined them only briefly on rare occasions. He appeared mainly for public or social moments and spent most of his time in the United States, where his identity as the Desert Man defined his fame. The Johnsons valued him as a storyteller and symbol rather than a constant travel companion, and they returned from their travels with many of the furnishings and decorative items that gave the castle its distinctive character. Scotty's Castle and Lower Vine Ranch are connected by Grapevine Canyon, about 2 to 3 miles along the Wash and Ranch Road. Scotty regularly rode or walked this route, going up to the castle to greet guests and play his role as host and storyteller, then returning to his ranch once the show was over. Here, Scotty lived in a dark brown-stained wooden house where he cooked his own meals, slept in a simple bed, wrote letters and stories, and spent time with a few close friends rather than crowds. It was also where he cared for his dog, Wendy. The ranch included a wooden garage, grain and hay storage, a blacksmith shop, corrals, reservoirs, and roads, all practical features of a working ranch. Built in the common bungalow style of the 1920s, the structures were simple and sturdy, emphasizing usefulness and quality over ornament. At Lower Vine Ranch, Death Valley Scotty lived very simply. When the ranch house was built, it did not include a modern bathroom. Sanitation was handled by an outdoor privy, typical of the remote desert ranches of the 1920s and 30s, and water use remained practical and limited despite the presence of nearby springs and ranch reservoirs. When Wendy died in 1946, Scotty buried him at the castle, where his small grave remains today. In a place full of tall tales, Wendy was one of the few things in Scotty's life that was truly real. The chime tower served as both a timekeeper and a showpiece. Its bells could be heard across the ranch, marking the day and adding to the feeling of a refined estate. The tower's height also helped balance the long, low buildings and tied the castle, gardens, and grounds together, reinforcing the sense of a planned desert oasis. Fountains were used both inside the house and throughout the gardens as part of a gravity-fed spring water system from Grapevine Canyon. They added sound, movement, and cooling air indoors and outdoors, reinforcing the impression of comfort and abundance in the desert. The gardens around the castle were designed to feel like a desert oasis. Spring water from Grapevine Canyon supported lawns, paths, and shade trees, while palms and cottonwoods softened the stone buildings and heightened the contrast between the green grounds and the surrounding desert. Spring water from Grapevine Canyon supported orchard crops such as citrus, peaches, apricots, plums, pomegranates, figs, grapes, and olives. These heat-tolerant fruits help make the ranch a working desert oasis, not just a showplace. The pool was planned as another major water feature within this system. Pipes and valves were intended to supply it, but when construction stopped, those connections were never completed. As a result, the basin and tiles exist, but the plumbing needed to fill the pool was never finished. The unfinished swimming pool planned was intended to be a large resort-style feature directly in front of the main facade. Based on historical descriptions and on-site estimates, the pool would have measured approximately 90 to 100 feet long and 20 to 25 feet wide, with a shallow end about 3 to 4 feet deep and a deep end reaching roughly 8 to 10 feet. In the early 1930s, after most of the main house was completed, a series of problems emerged during formal reviews of land ownership and boundary records. As the Johnsons finalized legal details and considered expansion, it was discovered that part of the castle stood on federal land. Rather than pursue costly corrections or additional land purchases, construction, including the planned pool, was brought to a halt. The surveying error was soon followed by the Great Depression, making further construction financially impractical and ending all expansion plans. Although Albert Johnson weathered the Depression better than most, it changed his outlook. Secure from earlier investments, he became more cautious with spending and chose to maintain what had already been built rather than to continue expanding Scotty's castle. Another life-changing event occurred in 1937 when Bessie Johnson suffered a serious accident on Town Pass in Death Valley and later died from her injuries. After her death, Albert Johnson visited the castle far less often, and its importance in his life changed profoundly. After Bessie's death and Albert's declining visits, his focus shifted toward preserving the property for the future. Death Valley Ranch, as it was then known, was transferred to a charitable foundation called the Gospel Foundation, helping to ensure its long-term preservation. Albert died in 1948, leaving the castle without its primary patron and financial supporter. However, he made provisions for Scotty to remain there for the rest of his life. Scotty lived at the castle until his death in 1954. He had often said he wanted to be buried on the hill overlooking the castle so he could keep an eye on the place. He was buried beside his dog, Wendy. In 1970, the National Park Service purchased the castle ranch from the Gospel Foundation for $850,000, with the foundation donating all the furnishings. Because of this foresight, the castle survived economic hardship, personal loss, and changing times, allowing it to be preserved for future generations. Over several years, we were fortunate to take a guided tour of the castle multiple times, visit Lower Vine Ranch, and attend an organ concert in the music room. The October 2015 floods were among the most damaging events in Scotty's castle's history, causing it to close. Intense storms sent flash floods through Grapevine Canyon, destroying roads, bridges, utilities, and flooding the visitor center. Although the main castle survived, water and mud entered the music room, damaging floors, walls, and mechanical systems. Moisture and debris threatened finishes and the historic pipe organ, requiring careful drying, cleaning, and restoration before the room could safely reopen. Rushing water and debris damaged the chimes tower base and surrounding infrastructure. Although the tower remained standing, stabilization and repairs to nearby systems were required. The flash floods damaged critical building systems, including electrical wiring, plumbing, water delivery lines, and drainage infrastructure. The hacienda also suffered significant damage. It was not the main residence, but a key support and operations facility. Other scenes of flood damage around Scotty's castle, including a full pool. A second major setback happened in July 2021 with a fire that destroyed Scotty's Castle Visitor Center and garage. The blaze caused a total loss of the building, including exhibits, vehicles, and support facilities used for tours and operations. The castle itself was not damaged. Since the 2015 flash flood and the 2021 fire, restoration at the castle has been further slowed by heavy rains in 2022 and 2024. Damage to the hacienda, originally used as guest rooms for the castle and later serving as the working backbone of Death Valley Ranch, with staff housing, offices, storage, and maintenance facilities, proved more extensive than originally expected. Funding for the restoration work comes from a combination of park entrance fees and federal funding. Total restoration costs are expected to reach about $70 million before the castle reopens. Things are looking up. This spring, the National Park Service, along with the Death Valley Natural History Association, offered ranger-led recovery tours which explored the 2015 flood, ongoing restoration work, as well as some history of the castle. Even though the recovery tours are completely sold out, they mark an important step in recovery, signaling a gradual return toward the visitor experiences offered before the flood and fire. In Desert Stone, a vision stood. Albert planned and Bessie would bring grace and music, calm and light, while Scotty spun his tales at night. The flood swept through in 2015. Fire followed, harsh and unseen. Yet still the castle does not fall. Restored with care, it waits for all.